I think it's a lovely, beautiful cover. That is one thing that straight away strikes you. And I noticed that these photographs are from his personal. So very nicely done. So, but more important than the cover is what is inside the cover. And as I was saying, I got the book a few days ago, and I glanced through several chapters. Of course, a cursory reading. And I realized that how little we know about what is happening in Africa. And except for the small community of Africa experts and Africa watchers, most of us nodding acquaintance, if not shallow knowledge about Africa and India-Africa relations. And this comes out very clearly when you look at the book and you look at the chapters that are put in the book. And I think the book covers a vast ground based on the personal experience of Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, who has served in Africa for several years, South Africa, Kenya. But more important, I think, who has followed Africa for a long time, and probably even more intensely after he retired as the Director General of the ICWA, and now as Gateway House. And through his writing, that we see that he's been following this relationship very closely, which means he's also documented very nicely the changes in Africa, but equally important, the changes that are taking place in India-Africa relations. So I want to thank Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia first for writing this book, for the experts, of course, who would read it with great interest, but also for laypersons, for students, and one of the target audience is students. And I think we need more such books in order to raise awareness about Africa. And second, for accepting our invitation to take part in this book discussion and tell us more about the book, and also inform us about Africa and India-Africa relations, and perhaps comment on how we have been doing. After all, we have been now focusing on Africa for a number of years. We have had 3 meetings of India-Africa Forum, and there is a great deal of interaction now with Africa. It is increasing, trade has increased, investment has increased, high-level visits have happened. This government has given a huge attention, political attention to developing our relations with Africa. So that is there, but how is it translating into concrete results? I think that would be interesting to have your assessments. We have see what exactly is the program. Sorry, I don't have it in front of me. Can somebody just brief me what exactly, how we have planned the program? I've just forgotten the, I want to open that file. Samir?
Sir, good morning, sir. Good morning.
Yeah.
So Bhatia sir will start with his presentation for about half an hour. Then Ruchita ma'am will speak on the book, followed by I will speak little bit on the book, and then the floor will open for question and answers and comments.
Okay, so that's where we are. So let me now take this opportunity to once again welcome all of you, and particularly Ambassador Bhatia. And we are keenly looking forward to his presentation on the book. And I think during the Q&A, we will also discuss how we can take this agenda forward of India-Africa engagement with India and Africa. We've had some seminars in the VIF. Samir has joined us some months ago, and he has done some wonderful work on Africa already. I think his Africa Digest is probably coming out very well, and his commentaries on Africa are also very good because he has lived in Africa. We had also done a seminar some months ago on a book that we had reprinted on India's contribution to East Coast of Africa, development of Africa. So I think all that we can discuss in the Q&A as well, so that as practical suggestions come out. So now I request Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia.
Thank you very much, Shri Arvind Gupta, Director, Vivekanand International Foundation. My greetings to the fellow panelists, Ruchita Berry and Samir Bhattacharya. This is an excellent blend of experience and youth in terms of expertise on Africa available in India. I would like to express my deep appreciation for this prestigious institution, VIF, which has already done a great deal of work to promote Africa studies. And I have taken liberty to cite a particular report and study done by VIF earlier because it was a very balanced and sober study. Dear friends, dear members of audience, I'm really delighted today to have this opportunity of a discussion on my book. And I'm very grateful to the organizers that they have given me as much as 30 minutes to speak on the subject. Usually in Delhi academic seminar circuit, you are lucky if you get 8 minutes. But I plan to use this generosity properly because I think it's important for the author to reveal much of the substance of his work so that it instills in listeners the desire and the impulse to actually read it. No matter how long you speak, we have to remember that this is a 90,000 word study done over a period of 2.5 years. So in that sense, actually 30 minutes is a fair amount of time given to me, and I certainly will not be exceeding it. Now, first of all, I think on a personal note, people do always want to know as to why this book and why at this time. I think this process of transforming oneself from a former diplomat to a serious scholar does mean that you have to go beyond contributing op-ed articles in the national dailies. They have their value, but they have short-term shelf life. Whereas if you have the courage and fortitude and the desire to commit your 2 or 3 years of life to writing a book, hopefully it is a greater investment which will produce some good results. I went through this once or twice earlier. I shall not go into all that. But this Africa book I felt was always embedded in me. First, because I studied Africa in political science and international relations. And then when at the turn of the century, I was sent out as India's ambassador to Kenya by Foreign Minister Gujral Sahab. And I thought that was the rich and eventful years. I was wrong. I was once again tapped to go and serve as India's High Commissioner to South Africa and Lesotho. And South Africa, as we know, is one of the most important and prestigious diplomatic assignments that any Indian diplomat can have to have as far as Africa is concerned. So I felt that God has given me this great opportunity of investment of 7 years of life. And then later, as Arvindji mentioned, the tenure at ICWA further whetted my appetite and quest for knowledge about Africa. So it is with that background I come to you presenting this book. Now, having surveyed the existing literature, I was very clear that I wanted to write on this theme, but with a wider angle. Typically, when we write an op-ed or an essay or a book on India-Africa relationship, we usually get so taken in by the theme itself that we handle it in isolation. But my approach is different. I believe that the theme of the relationship cannot be fully appreciated without an in-depth look on what is happening in Africa, and especially what has been happening in Africa's relationship with the world. And that is the reason why I've devoted several chapters, first of all, what I call transitions in Africa, and then what I describe as the third scramble for Africa, a title under which I have brought in many important relationships Africa has developed over the years. Another dimension was, how far back do you need to go? It's a very long story, and if you start very early, then you end up presenting a very blurred view of the present. And I'm grateful to all the authors who have done so much, including Ruchita, in terms of covering the past, that I felt that I could really use the past as the backdrop. And basically, I focused a little bit on the 20th century. But my principal attention was on the past 30 years, that is from the 1990s to now, so that we can examine the present with a closer look. In terms of transitions in Africa, I think we have to recognize that here is a continent. It is not a country, a continent of 54 countries, which has gone through many, many transformations. And without going into the previous era of slavery, colonialism, and post-colonialism, we can nevertheless stress that there was the age of hope that started in 1957 with Ghana securing its independence, which was then followed by the age of loss of hopes, because throughout 60s and 70s and even 80s, Africa was usually known for or as the source of bad news. It had to do a lot about poverty, illness, corruption, frequent change of government, misgovernance, and the rest of it. And this was the time when Africa simply failed to elicit international attention. But I think 90s was truly the transitional period when slowly the roots of hope began to grow. And we saw that in the changes that came in parts of Africa, particularly the emergence of a democratic new South Africa, the independence of Namibia, and several other factors. But most importantly, we noticed that the new leadership in Africa was getting fired by the idea of renaissance. People like President Mbeki and several of his colleagues began to talk candidly about the challenges facing Africa and how and why it needed a different approach, a changed approach. And this became clear when at the turn of the century, the process began for replacing the OAU, Organization of African Unity, by the African Union, which came into existence in 2002, and which then in turn set off a whole new train of thinking, decisions, policies, and actions. And this was then the bright period of Africa. So transition through the 90s and Renaissance through the past decades. That is how I tried to study Africa. Now, in this context, I think it's very important to know that Africa has developed extensive partnerships with a lot of international players. They have renewed their relationship with the traditional partners, Europe, the US. They have created new partnerships, Japan. But beyond Japan, I think in the last 20 years, very much with countries ranging from Brazil through UAE to Indonesia and Australia. And there is a whole chapter, in fact, one of the longest chapters, explaining this theme of the scramble, the third scramble for Africa. When I was composing the structure of this book, the former ambassador in me said that I'm not going to give free publicity in my book to China, and that I was not going to write about China because this book was on India-Africa relationship. But my counselors, whom I value, said that you must take the bull by the horn and you must explain and examine the China relationship with Africa, because this would enhance the value of the book. And dear friends, I followed this, and that is the reason why a separate exclusive chapter in this book has been devoted to Africa-China tango. And I have reason to critics have been taking full note of this particular chapter. The sum and substance of this examination is that China has undoubtedly invested a great deal in developing its relationship with a number of African countries. The scale of investment, the loans given, the magnitude of infrastructural development Chinese companies have done, and their contribution beyond infrastructure, it simply cannot be ignored. Our bias or our ignorance cannot blind us to the fact that China has contributed to the development of Africa. The issue is, how do we examine it? How do we examine it objectively? And that is where I have presented my view that there are three approaches. One that you often see in Europe and in parts of India, that whatever China has done is bad. The other, which you see emanating from Chinese scholars and many friends of China in Africa, all that China has done is all for the good. But there is a third school, and I subscribe to that school, is that China has been a mixed blessing or a mixed approach to Africa. It has done many good things, but others which are not so good. And therefore, fundamentally, the only credible way to examine China's contribution is, or at least a major credible way to examine China's view, is to listen to African voices. Africans themselves are not unanimous, they are divided on the subject, but by and large, they make a principal argument, which is very credible. They point out that had China not paid the kind of attention that it did to Africa, starting from the 1990s, probably the international community may not have really got itself so deeply engaged with Africa. Facts are clear, even in the case of India. While it is true that from the beginning of the 21st century, India began to renew its Africa policy, India began to take a number of measures to focus on the economic dimensions. But it was only in 2008, that is 8 years after the China experiment of FOCAC began, that India hosted the first India-Africa Forum Summit, which was on a much smaller scale. But nevertheless, it was a major transformational beginning in the history of India-Africa partnership. It was on a limited scale, only about 15 countries were involved because that is what the African side wanted. And Dr. Manmohan Singh, who hosted this in Delhi, repeated the act 3 years later by going to Ethiopia and participating in the second India-Africa Forum Summit. So these were two good beginnings. Importantly, a lot of funds were made available for a variety of programs stretching from training to funding projects. And I think all of us, the Africanists in India, were truly happy that a new beginning was being made. But at the same time, we were also aware, certainly 3 years thereafter, that there was a gap between our declarations and our delivery. And many of us were writing candidly about it at the time. So it is in that light then the third major stage in the implementation of India's Africa policy began, which was the 2015 summit that involved all African leaders. This was a revolutionary step in that sense. It raised further the profile of India, and it became clear that India is going to be very ambitious in terms of bringing a new quality, a new perspective on the relationship with Africa. And I have brought into my book, facts and figures, including, a specific which brings out the point that during the period 2015 and 19, more top-level Indian leaders, President, Vice President, Prime Minister, visited Africa than either before or since. This was a positive thing because I remember when I was serving in Africa, our interlocutors used to say that, you swear by us, and we know that at the emotional level, at the people's level, there's a big sympathy, support, and solidarity with Africa, but we don't get to see your leaders here. They don't come to our continent. This completely changed with these some 35 visits in a 4-year period. And this was only one side. The other side, African leaders have always loved to come and visit India and see how India is doing it, how India's development with the democracy model is working. So they always found Africa as a popular, India as a popular destination, then they were coming here. So it was this story that really made us all Africa experts very happy that now in Mr. Modi's time, even more resources were made available, more projects, more LOCs, bigger number of fellowships, 50,000 were promised. They were all, I think, more or less used. And meanwhile, of course, institutional reforms had taken place in MEA, and the new agency DPA was at it in terms of expanding the cooperation. But then something happened. Starting from about 2020. First, COVID came, then China came, and now Ukraine. And of course, in the process, Indian economy also had suffered. So these 4 factors slowed down the process of rebuilding the economic and political and a strategic partnership with Africa. This is the last phase which I have covered because I was completing the book. I think it covers the period up to about early 2021. And dear friend, this was best reflected in our inability to hold the 4th India-Africa Forum Summit, which has been delayed by, I think, about 2 years now. We all understood that a physical summit was not possible, but many of us were unable to understand why a virtual summit could not be held. Technologically, it is possible. If President Biden can host some 120 countries for his summit for democracies, surely it is within India's capability to host a 54+1 summit. I suppose summit would need commitment of additional resources. That could be a problem, but then that will be guided by the political judgment. If we feel that beyond emotional and sentimental reasons, partnership with Africa, a deep partnership with Africa, is beneficial in terms of India's strategic, political, economic, and social interests, then we have no choice but to make that extra funding available so that the partnership moves forward on a rapid pace that we had chosen back in 2015. So this is the short, in brief, the story about the government to relationship. I've not covered the business part in much deeper depth, partly because I know some of my colleagues have been working on that theme, but I have gone into the people-to-people relationship in some depth. There is a separate chapter devoted to it because I genuinely feel that the non-governmental sector here has a major role to play in deepening the partnership. People like you and me, think tanks, civil society, youth and women groups, universities, and our young experts have a huge burden of expectations on them. They understand the modern world. They will be the leaders later in this century. And if they can connect with their counterparts in Africa, and if we, the senior generation, could transmit to them the kind of solidarity we felt from the times of Gandhi and Nehru to Narendra Modi, then we may have actually fulfilled our responsibility. So in brief, I would say G2G relationship has done well, at least until the COVID era hit us. B2B is doing okay, but I think I have pointed out many areas of improvement and expansion, and certainly people-to-people relationship needs a very close look. In the other chapters, I have gone into much detail about the continental, regional, and bilateral dimensions. I just want to say in the end that it is not possible for any author, unless you're writing an encyclopedia, to cover India's relations with all 54 countries. So I decided to be a little subjective. I picked a list of 15 African countries which are important in their areas and which are important in terms of interests of India. And I have tried to present snapshots of the relationships with those countries. So in a way, it is a integrated coverage of the 3 dimensions. And finally, in the last chapter of the book, once again, I think maybe 36 years in the government compelled me to present in a nutshell a list of policy recommendations covering various domains. They are something that I hope scholars will debate and policymakers will consider, so that this labor of love for India-Africa relationship bears some fruit in the short to medium term. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bhatia, for that overview of the book. And in one of your recommendations, talks about setting up a Africa advisory group, so that all these various strands which are there we can pick up, and also I think also this is a very good suggestion, because this will help us build our relationship with Africa in the future. Right now, the community of African experts is really very small and under-resourced. And though we have taken a number of steps in the last few years to enhance government-to-government relationship, as you mentioned, but I think how important is Africa in our foreign policy when you compare it with other regions and other countries. That's an assessment also that I think we need to make. Yes, there has been some optics, and there has been some real progress also. But given the scope of the relationship and the urgency, whether we are doing enough, I think it's a question mark. And one of the reasons is that people to people and business to business mass. And that is the area I think we need to work on. So let me now invite Ruchita Berry from Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, a renowned Africa expert, also a part of the community of those enthusiasts for Africa. And I think single-handedly she has, in the last 3 decades, built relationships in the academic circle between Africa and India. So great to have you, Ruchita, with us for this discussion. So over to you.
Thank you, sir, for the kind words. Thank you for the invitation to speak this virtual book discussion on India-Africa relations changing horizon by Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia. Just to let the audience know, I'm Ruchita Berry from the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. I work on Africa, been working on these issues for a very long time, and also currently the president of India's African Studies Association. So I'm really delighted to be here and discussing this very prominent study on India-Africa relations. It is by my dear friend, Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, who I've known for a considerable time. And I find that he has used his long innings in the Indian Foreign Service, and also his stay in various parts of Africa, particularly Kenya, South Africa, and Lesotho, to come out with this important contribution to African studies. India's relationship with African countries is unfortunately not attracted much scholarly study, whether in India or abroad. I have in past myself and some other scholars had tried to get some grant, and it is very interesting to note that till a few years back, nobody was interested in funding a study on India and Africa. So that shows the lack of interest, not just in India, but also abroad in how the Indian relationship with the African countries is being perceived across the world. But the things are changing now, as this book has shown. I find that the focus of book is on analyzing the India-Africa relations in the past 2 decades, and the study has clearly pointed out that why is it important to study the changing horizons or the changing relationship between a country, that is India, and a continent, that is Africa? And the author, I think, makes it very clear right from the beginning that by 2050, India and Africa will be home to 4.1 billion people, accounting 42% of mankind. So obviously, it is important to know how these two regions relate to each other, and this has become a subject of global interest also at the moment. So in my presentation today, I will basically give you 5 reasons as to why I think that this book is an interesting read and a must for scholars of India-Africa who are really interested in India-Africa relations. Here I must note that while the title of the book suggests to be a study of India-Africa relations, however, the reader gains insights on several other important issues, and I would like to make them known to you. First, I think it gives a clear picture as to why Africa is often hailed as the continent of future, whether it's population or economic growth. In the recent years, 4 of the fastest growing economies of the world belong to Africa. They are Ivory Coast, Ethiopia, Ghana, and Rwanda. These are the estimates which we got in the pre-COVID period, just two years back. But this shows that Africa has come a long way. It is no longer a hopeless continent as the economist had pointed out long time back. It is a continent which is full of hope. And the African have a lot of aspirations and goals. And some of these aspirations which Ambassador Bhatia has pointed out in his study are the goals such as the Agenda 23, which reflects a Pan-African vision of an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa. The other thing which Ambassador points out is about the innovative framework of African peer review mechanism, to which 33 of the 54 countries agreed to participate. This reflects the enthusiasm within Africa to self-evaluate on issues related to governance. I haven't seen any of the other countries, whether in Africa, in Asia or Latin America, do this, So I find that the African countries have, as a group, been involved in some experiments or some ideas which are new and innovative, and for which the others can learn. And these are something which Ambassadors Bhatia's study really bring out for all of us to reflect. The launch of African continental free trade area is also another step taken by the Africans to enhance the economic integration process. But Ambassador Bhatia has also given a realistic picture, and he says that the African countries have a long way to go ahead. There are a lot of challenges in this integration process, and the way in implementing the goals to real action. This is where Africa is lagging behind. The second point why I think this study is important is that in terms of bilateral relations, the author gives us a quick peep into the history of India-Africa relations, mainly to re-emphasize the point that India-Africa relations are not new and can be traced back to centuries. He provides a critical analysis of Mahatma Gandhi and Pandit Nehru's role in improving relations with the African continent. In fact, he dwells into issues which are not really dwelt in the public domain as to why there were certain protests in the African countries regarding when in some countries Mahatma Gandhi's statues was being placed, and so he deals with it with a lot of sensitivity and gives a clear and realistic answer to these sensitive issues. He also articulates in a brief manner the drivers that shape the growing India-Africa ties, whether it is the appeal of India's unique political and development model, or India's proven success in the field of technology, IT, as India is one of the biggest IT leaders, the increasing Indian commercial interest in Africa, and India's attractive educational and skill development or training centers, educational institutions, which uh, uh, which have attracted a lot of African students to our country, and also the long-standing people-to-people bonds. Uh, in his evaluation of the study or evaluation of India-Africa relations in the last 2 decades, I think he has done something which is very unique. He has not just dealt with the bilateral relations, he's also dealt with the relationship with the regional groupings and at the Pan-Africa level. He has discussed the the India-Africa Forum Summit as to how it led to a development of a close relationship between India and the African Union Commission, and this has paved a way to say that there's always been a discussion and debate as to why we are discussing India-Africa relations, because say Africa is a continent, and why are we discussing Africa? We should discuss India's relations with each of the 54 countries. So in his book, he has made this very clear that Africa is a continent, and our relationship is both with the individual countries in Africa, and also with the at the Pan-African level and at the regional grouping level, whether it is with ECOWAS or SADC or other countries. He has, I think, Ambassador Bhatia has made that comment in his introduction of the book, and I find that the way he's dealt with the current relationship during Prime Minister Modi's time is also interesting. He's clearly showed that the interest shown by the current administration, the number of high-level visits to Africa, and the increasing association with Africa in other issues, whether it's blue economy or with energy issues, formation of the International Solar Alliance, of which 40 countries from Africa are signatories, shows that India's relationship with Africa is moving to a different level totally, and that Africa has become a priority for India in the current years. The third point that I would like to note here is that in his book, he discusses not just the relationship with India, but also with the Africa's relationship with the other major powers, whether it is the traditional external partners like EU, with whom the African countries have a love-hate relationship, I feel, as the Africans perceive them to be exploitative and manipulative through relationships which has been often described as partnership, but I would clearly say that it is unequal, and this is what Ambassador Bhatia also brings out in his chapter on this issue. He also discusses the role of other external powers, such as the US, which used Africa as a battleground for proxy wars during the Cold War period, while the war on terrorism and trade and commercial tribes have shaped their interest in Africa in the recent years. And the author rightly points out, I feel, that Japan is the first international partner to pioneer a regular institutional dialogue with African countries. He also dwells on Africa's relationship with Russia and its increasing political and security cooperation with African countries. And this discussion would be very interesting for people who are trying to understand Africa's relations with or the response to Ukraine in the current context. Similarly, he provides us with reasons for the growing interest of Africa's other new external partners such as Turkey, UAE, Indonesia, Republic of Korea, Brazil, and Australia. I find here the inclusion of Indonesia, Australia is very important because Africa, at least the Indian Ocean littoral, is part of the Indo-Pacific. So it's very interesting and important to understand the viewpoint of Australia and Indonesia in terms of Africa. And as Ambassador Bhatia has explained, that all these countries are looking very closely at Africa. Australia has come out with a white paper that stresses the importance of engaging with Africa. Brazil is again a country which has shown a lot of interest to the African continent. The most important relationship between Brazil and Africa was during President Lula's administration, where he engaged with the African countries a lot because he considered the fact that Brazil has a considerable African population as an important point for interacting with the African countries. I'm not really sure whether the current administration in Brazil is so much interested in engaging with Africa, but Ambassador Bhatia's chapter on this really brings out the nuances of Brazil's interaction with Africa. And of course, his detailed discussion on China-Africa relation is again something which is very important in terms of understanding how China is really emerging as an important partner for the African countries. But I wish that he had given a kind of perspective and a slight comparison vis-a-vis all these major partners with India. How is India different with each of them? But I guess that could be a next project for Ambassador Bhatia. We may consider that in the future. The fourth point, which I find unique in this book, is the fact that he has shown that Africa is not a monolith, and therefore, for the first time, I find that a book on Africa comes up with an analysis of bilateral relations with 15 countries, and this analysis of these 15 countries, which are I think Angola, Botswana, Democratic Republic of Congo, Egypt. So they are from all across Africa, whether it's North, Southern Africa, East or West Africa. He has given a snapshot of how the country has progressed in the last 2 decades, and then assessed India's relations with these countries. So this becomes a ready reckoner for anyone who's studying India-Africa relations. And while it is not very clear as to why these countries are important, he does mention that these are because of these countries have been chosen because of the strategic security, political and diplomatic importance for India. But I think, having said that, I think it would have been interesting to note in his discussion of these countries' bilateral relations with India as to why they are so important too. Fifth and the last point that I would like to make is his discussion about Indian diaspora in Africa, which I think is about more than a lakh, about 150,000 people of Indian origin live in Africa. So it's very important to understand their perspectives as to how they perceive India. And also the African diaspora in India. And he has dealt with this sensitive issue in a masterly manner, I would say. He has clearly given guidelines to the government of India and others as to how to deal with this issue. The media has, in the recent years, since 2014, come up with reports of harassment and attacks on African students in India. And while we are, on one hand, making so much effort in trying to build a relationship with the youth in Africa, inviting them to study in India. But if they face this harassment in India, that really negates all the efforts done at the government to government level. And as Ambassador Bhatia points out in his discussion during in that chapter, he says clearly that this shows a lack of understanding in the common people about how important Africa is to India, and there's a need at the civil society level to educate the people, the larger public, about the importance of Africa and how African students are some are very important to us. So so all in all, I think that this is a very important study, and we need to really all of us make to the bookstores and get a copy and read it to get a nuanced understanding of India-Africa relations. I'll stop here and wait for any questions and comments.
Thank you very much for that a thorough review of the book. You've gone through, I think, all the major issues, 5 major points that you made, and all of them are important. And I think the point about diaspora, which you mentioned, is extremely important. And the media very often focuses on diaspora issues, and these are quite tricky issues as well. And diaspora can be a double-edged sword. But the fact that we have a very deep connection with Africa, that's also, I think, one plus in favor of India-Africa relations. But how to build that relationship using diaspora requires a certain amount of deftness. I'm glad that you mentioned that. This has been covered well in the book. So now let me request Mr. Samir Bhattacharya, who, as I said, has joined the VIF a few months ago. And in this short period, I think he's done some very good work on Africa, and his digest is really worth looking. And I hope, Samir, you are sending it widely to everyone. And I think the important point about Africa, and which is also covered in many of these his digests, is what is happening there as of today. And there are several disturbing developments in Africa, which also have been mentioned in the meetings of the Africa Union and various other meetings, particularly on the issue of democracy. I think resurgence of coups and illegal, unconstitutional tendencies, which probably are going to prove to be impediment in Africa's own growth. And this is something that Africans themselves are talking about. Then this terrorism and radicalization, which has become a very big issue. Then, of course, this Ambassador Bhatia mentioned about the scramble. Probably he mentioned it, I do not know whether he mentioned it in a positive sense, but the earlier connotations of scramble were entirely negative. So scramble is there, but that does not necessarily mean it's a good thing for Africa. And I think Africa, though it's a continent of future, and there is also both optimism and pessimism about Africa. So India will have to first understand these trends well, and unfortunately, there's not enough understanding. The scholarly community is very small. Business to business relationship is relatively small. people-to-people relation is small, whereas Africa is there's so many trends that are rising about which we have very little understanding. So this book, I think, will fills the gap to an extent, but also underlines the fact that we need to study it more. So we need people, younger scholars like Samir. So Samir, over to you. What is your impression about the book?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your kind words. First of all, I wanted to thank Ambassador Bhatia for accepting to present your book in our forum. So I would just share that 2 months ago, when I read your book, it was so passionately written. I could not stop, and I called director sir immediately, and I said, sir, this is a book that we must read and we must present in our forum. He agreed, and then I get in touch with you, and then you also explained the how you wrote the book, and over the in just last 2 months you kind of guided me in lot of other Africa related issues. So great, I mean, a lot of thanks to you. And also I wanted to thank Ruchita ma'am for kindly accepting the invitation to present your you are like an institution as far as India Africa connection goes. So being speaking with after sir and you is like it's like an honor for me. So I will share a little bit about my experience, what I felt while reading the book, and I will point out, add, because most of the things both of you have already mentioned. I will add some more points which probably you did not mention, but I found very interesting. So basically, this book, sir, you have what I found. You wrote this book to make people Africa aware. So it's like. You have successfully presented a well-researched history of India's social, cultural, economic, and diplomatic engagement, and you mixed it well with your own experience. So when we give this kind of introduction, it might sound very unrealistic that how can somebody can cover such a broad range of engagement, and how can the person find such sources to establish this vast narrative and the collection of data for say over several decades. It's not very easy, and it requires extensive research. So in 2.5 years, probably COVID helped you stayed at your home and research, but kudos to you. It's a extensive research you did, and you could effectively glance through each era of India-Africa relation, and you highlighted all the key events of each period. So it's like it's although it's like your goal was to make Indian people and policymakers, students, Africa aware. I think this elegantly written and very passionate book. It can be a very good guide for students of African studies, and I think it should be recommended as a textbook. Now there are so many books on India's Africa's relationship on China, and compared to that, Africa's relationship with India is very few. And those book which deals with India Africa relationship, they are either dealing with mostly they deal with Gandhi's influence in Africa, or Indian diaspora, particularly Eastern and Southern Africa, or also India's engagement in Africa's anti-colonial struggle or apartheid, establishment of political institution. But a book which address all the aspects of India Africa engagement, that's very rare. So in that way, it's very comprehensive, I found. Then as Ruchita ma'am also mentioned, one I liked one good part is you did not consider Africa as a monolith you acknowledged the diversity, and you divided Africa into very specific 4 language zones: Arab speaking Africa, English speaking Africa, French speaking Africa, and Lusophone Africa. Then you further splitted it into 8 economic groupings based on their regions. But then instead of delving into micro analysis of sector specific or regional specific, you opted to focus on a common thread, and you developed a shared narrative for the continent. So so I think your skill as a as a researcher, it's extensive research, but your skill as a diplomat also have been very handy in writing this book. You could avoid broad generalizations about a continent which is like 20 times the size of India. Instead, you chose 15 specific countries, and you gave a, as you rightly said, you gave a very good snapshot. And the way you mixed your you told your shared or recollected your experiences and feelings. These are like whether be it I will mention three such para which made me in like awestruck. I was when I was reading your experience when you were in Peter Maritzburg railway station, when you were High Commissioner of India to South Africa and Lesotho. Also during your one-to-one conversation with Mandela in March 2007, and much earlier when Mandela visited India in October 1990, you were in the attendance. These are like a young person, young diplomat who is listening to Mandela. These are like so enriching, and you transformed that passion in that book. Like when somebody reads it, they can feel the emotion, and one can also learn about the important historical milestones. What also set this book apart, that you did not, although it dealt with mostly with the government to government relationship, but you also highlighted multiple channels among both societies that contributed to the strengthening of this historical link. So in that way, I think the book follows. If we talk from the academics perspective, this book is very similar to what Robert Keohane and Joseph Nye they have developed this complex interdependence paradigm. This book is kind of theoretical background of this book can be called as complex interdependence paradigm. Then you mentioned, like, as a plethora of political, intellectual, human elements as well as influential leader shaped the trajectory of India-Africa relationship. You stayed honest, and you did not highlight any individual event, like any particular individual event or a single leader. You mentioned all the historical events, and you gave due credit to each leader for what they have contributed towards improving the India-Africa relation. Yes, certainly Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, they got the limelight. But you also mentioned about in detail about Indira Gandhi's contribution and his son Rajiv Gandhi's contribution. For example, I did not know about Rajiv Gandhi's active participation for promoting Namibia's independence and his contribution to launch of Africa Fund by NAM. These things were unknown to me. Then many other interesting details that are not popularly known, widely known, one could find in this book. So I learned that only two African countries, Ethiopia and Nigeria, supported India during India-China War of 1962. And then when we think of that period, it was the height of non-alignment movement. India was receiving very strong support from all the African countries, and then only two countries supporting India in against China is like a it's kind of shocking, but it is important to know. We also learned that during Bangladesh independence, Nigeria was the last country to support Bangladesh independence, despite India's lot of diplomatic effort. So I think these informations underpins the realistic foreign policy of most African countries, and it can actually serve as a caution for today's policy makers that a relationship which is not organic and need based cannot succeed. Uh, it is indeed critical to keep an eye on other powerful countries, what they are doing, and rightfully you have dedicated one entire chapter explaining China's ever increasing engagement in Africa. In addition, in addition to the generally used term that we use for China-Africa relation, many new terms you used, I found them interesting, funny, and they need, I think I would require much more research on those terms. Although you have given, for each term, you have given evidences. So some are like stadium diplomacy, palace diplomacy, fast-footed diplomacy, donation diplomacy. These are like very interesting. I think one good part about you is also you are very generous in your book in recognizing various individuals and organizations who have worked on the subject and have made significant contribution to raising Africa awareness in India. You have cited Ali Mazrui to explain the 5 dimensions of Pan-Africanism. You also mentioned Nelson Mandela to expound what is Gandhi's role in African independence movement. You mentioned Professor Ajay Dubey. He's my guide in Jawaharlal Nehru University. You mentioned him to describe India's foreign policy after 1962 Sino-India War. And you also mentioned Ruchita Berry, ma'am, for cooperative security framework between the 2 continents. Then the contribution of think tanks like ORF, RIS are acknowledged. And you have also recognized the work of our organization, VIF, with special mention of its task force report from 2018. I think the book as a whole, it chronicles India-Africa ties and defines its future scope. It lays out some key pillars to help sustain and support the architecture for deeper India-Africa engagement. As a connecting thread, you mentioned similar demographics, India's technological prowess, India Inc.'s strong and sincere efforts in Africa, then collaboration opportunities in education, training and skill development, and also historical people-to-people ties. It is true that India's capabilities, especially its expertise with coordinated policy action, is still limited. Inadequate funding is an issue, but it's not the only issue. India's diplomatic corps is understaffed, and domestic concerns easily sway foreign policy. What we have witnessed during recently during COVID times, how domestic realities, due to domestic realities, India had to stop giving vaccines to many African countries, and it created a lot of criticism against India. So maybe in the discussion, you could as a diplomat, former diplomat, you could guide us how we can separate foreign policy with domestic policy, so that they don't interfere each other in negative way. Then I think you although you focused on bilateral ties, you mentioned that like apart from signing a few memorandum of understanding, India has done very little to do regional integration. And now that AFCFTA is coming, it will change the reality, and India needs to adapt. So India is already doing good in triangular development cooperation or third country partners. For example, ISA with France or AAGC with Japan. Now, recently, UAE also has shown strong interest in collaborating with India for Africa development. But despite all this hard work done, this Africa could be a missed opportunity unless India ensures the implementation of its policy at the ground level. And how to ensure that, for example, these LOCs that India is providing, how to ensure that LOCs are providing the desired result, how to ensure this monitoring. Probably you can guide us on that also. And I would end with my own evaluation of India-Africa relationship is that when in 2000 the Economist published its cover article saying Africa the hopeless continent, and just one decade later in 2011 Economist, same journal, covered the same continent once more, and they gave the title Africa Rising. So I think while much of this newfound enthusiasm is stemming from the continent's limitless possibility, it is evident that this continent is frequently and substantially misunderstood. People often misunderstand this continent in last 2 years, but this continent is, I would say, it is still more democratic than it was a decade ago. It has a lot of internal conflicts. Many countries are going through civil wars, agreed. Then there is the rise of radical Islamists in many countries, but then still these countries are much better prepared to counter economic shock caused by COVID-induced pandemic. I think the continent offers a massive growth opportunity once this pandemic subsides. So when the it was evident that it wanted to extend and diversify its engagement in this new frontier. And probably now now that COVID is after COVID, I would say it's the time to build a time-bound action plan for the future of Indo-African ties. And I think that this book can largely contribute towards that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Samir, for that, for your remarks. You brought in several new aspects in the book, so it's really a rich book in that sense. So now I'll open this for discussion. If anybody would like to make a comment, kindly raise your hands. And I already have one comment in the chat box. Maybe we can begin with that. And then I also see one raised hands from Kota. I'll come to you, Kota, in a moment. So Anurag wants to know whether India and Africa Union can jointly work together to deal with the threat of narcotics, in which sometimes African drug cartels are involved. So that's one question. We'll take a few more, and then I'll get back to Mr. Bhatia if you would like to make some comments. Yes, Kota, you want to say something?